And now, in the blooming summer days, behold Mr. and Mrs. Boffin established in the eminently aristocratic family mansion, and behold all manner of crawling, creeping, fluttering, and buzzing creatures, attracted by the gold dust of the Golden Dustman. Foremost among those leaving cards at the eminently aristocratic door before it is quite painted, are the Veneerings, out of breath, one might imagine, from the impetuosity of their rush to the eminently aristocratic steps. 1 copperplate Mrs. Veneering, 2 copperplate Mr. Veneerings, and a connubial copperplate Mr. and Mrs. Veneering, requesting the honor of Mr. and Mrs. Boffin's company at dinner with the utmost analytical solemnities. The enchanting Lady Tippins leaves a card. Twemlow leaves cards. A tall custard-colored phaeton tooling up in a solemn manner leaves 4 cards, to wit, a couple of Mr. Podsnaps, a Mrs. Podsnap, and a Miss Podsnap. All the world and his wife and daughter leave cards. Sometimes the world's wife has so many daughters that her card reads rather like a miscellaneous lot at an auction, comprising Mrs. Tapkins, Miss Frederica Tapkins, Miss Antonina Tapkins, Miss Malvina Tapkins, and Miss Euphemia Tapkins. At the same time, the same lady leaves the card of Mrs. Henry George Alfred Swashel, née Tapkins, also a card, Mrs. Tapkins at home, Wednesdays, music, Portland Place. Miss Bella Wilfer becomes an inmate, for an indefinite period, of the eminently aristocratic dwelling. Mrs. Boffin bears Miss Bella away to her milliners and dressmakers, and she gets beautifully dressed. The Veneerings find with swift remorse that they have omitted to invite Miss Bella Wilfer. 1 Mrs. Veneering and 1 Mr. and Mrs. Veneering, requesting that additional honor, instantly do penance in white cardboard on the hall table. Mrs. Tapkins likewise discovers her omission, and with promptitude repairs it, for herself, for Miss Tapkins, for Miss Frederica Tapkins, for Miss Antonina Tapkins, for Miss Malvina Tapkins, and for Miss Euphemia Tapkins. Likewise, for Mrs. Henry George Alfred Swashel, née Tapkins. Likewise, for Mrs. Tapkins at home, Wednesdays, music, Portland Place. Tradesmen's books hunger, and tradesmen's mouths water, for the gold dust of the Golden Dustman. As Mrs. Boffin and Mississippi Wilfer drive out, or as Mr. Boffin walks out at his jog-trot pace, the fishmonger pulls off his hat with an air of reverence founded on conviction. His men cleanse their fingers on their woolen aprons before presuming to touch their foreheads to Mr. Boffin or lady. The gaping salmon and the golden mullet lying on the slab seem to turn up their eyes sideways, as they would turn up their hands if they had any, in worshipping admiration. The butcher, though a portly and a prosperous man, doesn't know what to do with himself, so anxious is he to express humility when discovered by the passing Boffins taking the air in a mutton grove. Presents are made to the Boffin servants, and bland strangers with business cards meeting said servants in the street, offer hypothetical corruption. As, supposing I was to be favored with an order from Mr. Boffin, my dear friend, it would be worth my while to do a certain thing that I hope might not prove wholly disagreeable to your feelings. But no one knows so well as the secretary, who opens and reads the letters, what a set is made at the man marked by a stroke of notoriety. Oh, the varieties of dust for ocular use, offered in exchange for the gold dust of the Golden Dustman. 57 churches to be erected with half-crowns, 42 parsonage houses to be repaired with shillings, 27 organs to be built with halfpence, 1,200 children to be brought up on postage stamps. Not that a half-crown, shilling, halfpenny, or postage stamp would be particularly acceptable from Mr. Boffin, but that it is so obvious he is the man to make up the deficiency. And then the charities, my Christian brother. And mostly in difficulties, yet mostly lavish, too, in the expensive articles of print and paper. Large fat private double letter, sealed with ducal coronet. Nicodemus Boffin, Esquire. My dear sir, having consented to preside at the forthcoming annual dinner of the Family Party Fund, and feeling deeply impressed with the immense usefulness of that noble institution and the great importance of its being supported by a list of stewards that shall prove to the public the interest taken in it by popular and distinguished men, I have undertaken to ask you to become a steward on that occasion. Soliciting your favorable reply before the 14th instant, I am, my dear sir, your faithful servant, Linseed. P.S. The steward's fee is limited to 3 guineas. Friendly this, on the part of the Duke of Linseed, and thoughtful in the postscript, only lithographed by the hundred in presenting but a pale individuality of an address to Nicodemus Boffin, Esquire, in quite another hand. It takes 2 noble earls and a viscount, combined, to inform Nicodemus Boffin, Esquire, in an equally flattering manner, that an estimable lady in the west of England has offered to present a purse containing £20 to the Society for granting annuities to unassuming members of the middle classes, if 20 individuals will previously present purses of £100 each. And those benevolent noblemen very kindly point out that if Nicodemus Boffin, Esquire, should wish to present 2 or more purses, it will not be inconsistent with the design of the estimable lady in the west of England, provided each purse be coupled with the name of some member of his honored and respected family. These are the corporate beggars. But there are, besides, the individual beggars, and how does the heart of the secretary fail him when he has to cope with them? And they must be coped with to some extent, because they all enclose documents. They call their scraps documents, but they are, as to papers deserving the name, what minced veal is to a calf, the non-return of which would be their ruin. That is say, they are utterly ruined now, but they would be more utterly ruined then. Among these correspondents are several daughters of general officers, long accustomed to every luxury of life, except spelling, who little thought, when their gallant fathers waged war in the peninsula, that they would ever have to appeal to those whom Providence, in its inscrutable wisdom, has blessed with untold gold, and from among whom they select the name of Nicodemus Boffin, Esquire, for a maiden effort in this wise, understanding that he has such a heart as never was. The secretary learns, too, that confidence between man and wife would seem to obtain but rarely when virtue is in distress, so numerous are the wives who take up their pens to ask Mr. Boffin for money without the knowledge of their devoted husbands, who would never permit it, while, on the other hand, so numerous are the husbands who take up their pens to ask Mr. Boffin for money without the knowledge of their devoted wives, who would instantly go out of their senses if they had the least suspicion of the circumstance. There are the inspired beggars, too. These were sitting, only yesterday evening, musing over a fragment of candle which must soon go out and leave them in the dark for the rest of their nights, when surely some angel whispered the name of Nicodemus Boffin, Esquire, to their souls, imparting rays of hope, nay confidence, to which they had long been strangers. Akin to these are the suggestively befriended beggars. They were partaking of a cold potato and water by the flickering and gloomy light of a lucifer match, in their lodgings, rent considerably in arrear, and heartless landlady threatening expulsion like a dog into the streets, when a gifted friend happening to look in, said, "Write immediately to Nicodemus Boffin, Esquire," and would take no denial. There are the nobly independent beggars too. These, in the days of their abundance, ever regarded gold as dross, and have not yet got over that only impediment in the way of their amassing wealth, but they want no dross from Nicodemus Boffin, Esquire. No, Mr. Boffin, the world may term it pride, paltry pride if you will, but they wouldn't take it if you offered it, alone, sir, for 14 weeks to the day, interest calculated at the rate of 5% per annum, to be bestowed upon any charitable institution you may name, is all they want of you, and if you have the meanness to refuse it, count on being despised by these great spirits. There are the beggars of punctual business habits too. These will make an end of themselves at 1:45 p.m. on Tuesday, if no post office order is in the interim received from Nicodemus Boffin, Esquire. Arriving after 1:45 p.m. on Tuesday, it need not be sent, as they will then, having made an exact memorandum of the heartless circumstances, be cold and deaf. There are the beggars on horseback too, in another sense from the sense of the proverb. These are mounted and ready to start on the highway to affluence. The goal is before them, the road is in the best condition, their spurs are on, the steed is willing, but, at the last moment, for want of some special thing, a clock, a violin, an astronomical telescope, an electrifying machine, they must dismount forever, unless they receive its equivalent in money from Nicodemus Boffin, Esquire. Less given to detail are the beggars who make sporting ventures. These, usually to be addressed in reply under initials at a country post office, inquire in feminine hands, dare one who cannot disclose herself to Nicodemus Boffin, Esquire, but whose name might startle him were it revealed, solicit the immediate advance of £200 from unexpected riches exercising their noblest privilege in the trust of a common humanity? In such a dismal swamp does the new house stand, and through it does the secretary daily struggle breast high. Not to mention all the people alive who have made inventions that won't act, and all the jobbers who job and all the jobberies jobbed, though these may be regarded as the alligators of the dismal swamp, and are always lying by to drag the golden dustman under. But the old house. There are no designs against the golden dustman there? There are no fish of the shark tribe in the Bower waters? Perhaps not. Still, Wegg is established there, and would seem, judged by his secret proceedings, to cherish a notion of making a discovery. For, when a man with a wooden leg lies prone on his stomach to peep under bedsteads, and hops up ladders, like some extinct bird, to survey the tops of presses and cupboards, and provides himself an iron rod which he is always poking and prodding into dust mounds, the probability is that he expects to find something.